Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's BEAT-IRS, serving Alaskans, Americans since 1978 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. We have with us Daniel Horowitz. He's a regular guest on this program, senior editor of the Conservative Review, always focusing on the hot-button issues in Congress. He's hardly gotten any sleep last night because, as he put it, his whole life is coming together into focus as a consequence of some of the major issues now that are facing this country that obviously all of us are aware of. The San Bernardino terror, he wrote an article on that, just came out today. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Daniel, thanks for taking the time to join us on the Joe Miller Show despite your sleep deprivation.
No problem. I'm on my 3rd cup of coffee and ready to go.
Okay. Well, let's kind of bring our listeners up to speed with what happened down in California just briefly. I mean, most of the listeners are aware, 14 dead, 17 injured, at least 1 foreign national involved. Just give us a nutshell of where we're at on the investigation.
Sure. This is pretty unbelievable that, 30 hours after the fact, they still don't want to call a spade a spade. If this were, a guy with a Confederate flag, you'd know everything about it. But this is very clear. This is everything we spoke about the last couple times I was on the show. This is coming to fruition, the Islamic terror that we were predicting, the homegrown Islamic terror. When I say homegrown, I mean the fact that over the last generation or two, we brought in so many immigrants from the Middle East in conjunction with the modern-day radicalization through cyber jihad, through the Internet. This was one of those cases. So we find out that, again, the male, Saeed Farouk, he himself was actually born here, which just shows how deeply rooted the problem is in many of these Muslim communities. His parents, or at least father, appear to be Pakistani. That seems to be the latest news. His wife, whom he picked up in Saudi Arabia last year and married her and brought her over, she's a Pakistani national, so there's kind of the connection there. He has evidently gone over to Pakistan and Saudi Arabia over the last number of years. So you have the signs there, and the FBI is leaking out that, at least the stuff they say publicly, that he has been into contact with 1 or more, it seems like both domestic and foreign individuals that the FBI has been aware of, radical Islamists. So, this wasn't homegrown in the sense that so-called lone wolf, and this wasn't ISIS infiltration. This is the worst type of terrorism that we're going to, unfortunately, if we don't change the trajectory, we're going to see more of, in that it's a number of younger, either people came here as young immigrants, even born here, the children of Muslim immigrants who are becoming radicalized, getting drawn into this, joining terror groups, loosely affiliated with them or just getting inspired by them and perpetrating terror attacks.
One of the issues I wanted just to touch on briefly, or maybe get your commentary on, is when we talk about what they did, of course, killing people, the slaughter they're involved in, it's unthinkable to any listener on this program, I would hope. But when you consider the fact also that they left a 6-month-old parentless, they had just given birth to a child. He had just come back from paternity leave. I mean, that reflects a degree of radicalism that is just unthinkable.
Well, it's unthinkable, but it isn't unthinkable. I mean, unfortunately, meaning, watching the news, cable news, Fox News last night, they were so bewildered and befuddled. Unfortunately, I personally wasn't very surprised. This is jihad for you. This is Sharia. The problem is many Westerners approach this issue by projecting their own thought processes into these individuals. And they need to understand that Sharia transcends those values and those logical thought processes. And, this case and the Chattanooga shooter fly in the face of all their narratives. And I want to get to a broader point. This is why the vetting narrative is such a non sequitur and so off base. Because you don't have a case where you have a moderate Muslim and trained professional terrorists. There's no bright red line. It's that all Sharia adherent Muslims, and the more fervent they are, have an increasing likelihood, especially nowadays with the success of the Internet, to be drawn into this. and you're not going to necessarily know it at the time they come to the country. But the more numbers you bring over, the more people they have to influence them, the less assimilation. But when I say less assimilation, I'm talking about assimilating into our political values. This guy had a government job. He wasn't impoverished. Same thing with the Chattanooga shooter. He wasn't disadvantaged. He had a wife. They had a kid. They just had a kid. The company his fellow coworkers he killed evidently had a baby shower for him. This is not, there's nothing to be disgruntled about. So on the surface, it's stupefying. But when you understand Sharia, it's not. I mean, this is what jihad is all about. Kill the infidel, Islamic supremacism and acting upon Islamic supremacism. It comes in all shapes and sizes, and it will affect even those who have been born here to Muslim families, much less. You could only imagine the hundreds of thousands we've been bringing over just over the last 5 years or so. And I would add to that the final piece of information I'd like to share that I just saw coming across the wires. It says that the female, the wife, who was brought over on a K-1 visa. So if you're a U.S. citizen, you could bring over a fiance and say, hey, I'm getting married imminently. And as long as you act on that marriage within 90 days, that gets converted usually into a permanent immigrant visa, which, is a matter of general policy. You want American citizens to have that ability. But, when the immigrant is from a country like Pakistan, well, the question is, are they vetted? So it says she passed the counterterrorism test, and she passed the vetting. Well, how did she pass the vetting? I'll tell you why. Because she unlikely had any direct database information on her being affiliated with a professional terror group. But that misses the broader point. She was a firm adherent to Sharia.
As a matter of policy, it's my understanding they refuse to ask questions directly about religion or fervor of religion, et cetera.
I mean, the truth is that we like we spoke about last time, for refugee policy, they actually are supposed to ask those questions. They are supposed to vet that they are Christians. The certain specific programs were designed that way. But yeah, you better believe the Obama administration sure as heck is not going to vet it because they don't disagree with it. What I wrote in my article, my column today, what I found chilling and the embodiment of the problem is that the Council on American Islamic Relations, for whom the Fifth Circuit designated them an arm of Hamas, unindicted co-conspirator in a terrorism trial, they were the first to conduct a press conference before the FBI. That. They got a hold of the brother-in-law. Gee, I really wonder. And that was just creepy. The guy wouldn't answer questions. And and the brother-in-law said the only thing he did say is, well, I'm shocked. I never saw any signs. You're right. I'm sure he never saw any signs because, again, they agree with it. When you have that fervent belief, they probably don't like America too much. What I would say is a crude analogy. It's kind of like smoking to lung cancer. Does every guy who smoked get lung cancer? Certainly not. Probably not even a majority. And I know plenty of chain smokers who have lived a long life, but it is a clear and present danger, and it is an overwhelming systemic cause and effect and problem. And it's the same thing here. You cannot sever it. It's inexorably linked to Sharia and firm adherence to Islam, and there's no bright line for us to go and vet that.
It kind of shocks me, too, that, there's lots of numbers, you don't have a bright line, but you would think that with an individual, and I'm talking about at this point, Farouk, the fact that he had traveled back and forth between Pakistan, between Saudi Arabia, the United States, that he at least had contact with one terrorist figure, that would have at least triggered some oversight, and apparently there was none.
So, I mean, we're still trying to find this out, but don't you find it interesting that all these kind of establishment Republicans who are open borders, but they're so into the NSA surveillance, and that's where they kind of promote their national security bona fides.
Oh, it's an absolute outrage. I put up a post on Facebook about that the other day. If they're really serious about the security of the country, they'd shut down the borders. But instead, these exact same people that want to suspend our Fourth Amendment rights. Got to go to break, Daniel. Let's pick this up on the backside of this. Stay with us, The Joe Miller Show. Talking about the San Bernardino terror with Daniel Horowitz. Be right back. Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. We have with us Daniel Horowitz, senior editor at the Conservative Review. He's focusing on the terror that occurred in California. We were talking during the break a few minutes ago. Yeah, it's amazing that people can't even bring themselves to call this terror. When this report first came out, Daniel, I quickly put something up on social media that said, look, you've got multiple shooters, body armor, black suits, Arab-sounding names. Well, whenever the name came out, I guess that was a little bit after the shooting. First of all, you don't even have to say it's Muslim to call it terror. But what's with the hesitancy of the authorities to label this properly?
Well, it's funny. The biggest giveaway was the obfuscation. The fact that a certain amount of hours went on and we did not get details, I was like, I'm sure as heck that this is Islamic terror. This is the society we live in now. I mean, where truth is our enemy, and we refuse to speak the truth. If this guy were carrying a Confederate flag, we'd know about that in 3 seconds. And they make it all about that. But we now live in a society that is as firmly adherent to their religion as, devout Muslims are to Sharia. Yep. And that is, in the West, we worship political correctness. And we worship it to such an extent that we are willing to die rather than violate one of the tenets of that religion.
The fact that apparently one of the neighbors of Farouk noticed that lots of packages were coming in, there was just very strange activity ongoing that gave her concerns about potential terrorism. But she said, I didn't do it because I was afraid I'd be pursued for racial profiling. And of course, I'm not watching MSNBC and these other left-wing media outlets, at least on the moderate to the right outlets. Almost everybody that's commenting on this is saying, hey, we got to ditch this political correctness. We need to focus on security issues. Do you think that this is going to cause kind of the pendulum swing in the other direction? Or do you think that we've got this political correct blindness here to stay?
No, I think the country is with us. You look at the polling on Islamic immigration and the refugees, it cuts across almost every single every single demographic. It's astounding. It really is. The people are with us. The elites are not going to change. You see that in Europe. Europe is even worse, and they still haven't changed. They don't know the reality when it hits them in the face, or they're unwilling to see it. And you got to believe a lot of this is influenced by. Let's give an example: the juxtaposition to the Clock Boy case, the boy in Texas. Look at how excoriated the people there were for raising awareness when they thought the kid was, carrying a bomb. Right. And and that's what you have now, and that's what people don't realize. At some point, we're going to have to speak the truth. That it's not a matter of there's two things. There's Islam, and then there's kind of like extremist terrorists, and they just happen to be Muslim. No, it is absolutely associated with it, just like lung cancer is associated with smoking. And I think that's a good analogy. Certainly not everyone, not even a majority, necessarily get it, but it is huge. There's a huge correlation. It's direct causation, and this is why we will never get anywhere unless we have a cool-off period. I want to share with you, Joe, just one thing that I've passed around to some congressional offices that they should have some awareness to. Not only does the Congress have the right to obviously say we're not bringing in any type or category or origin of immigrants we want. There's no affirmative right to immigrate. But the president, without a statute of Congress, under existing statute, think about this. Obama violates congressional statutes to flood our countries with undesirable and harmful illegal immigrants, legal immigrants, and thwart enforcement. But there is one area where he has full discretion granted to him by Congress, and that is to shut off immigration. So Section 212, subsection F, whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem appropriate. This is an at-will, anytime, any circumstances.
Of course, he's not going to do that. He's more concerned about gun control. I mean, that was just absolutely pathetic. I mean, the smoke had barely cleared from the shooting, and he's talking about how we got to clear up this culture of guns. And you had I think O'Malley made the comment, attacking the NRA over what happened, when the very source of this is a consequence of the type of policies that both of them are promoting.
And that's the joke. The one lawful and morally correct approach that he has in his arsenal that was given to him, and the statutes, notice the statutes were written very deliberately, that in order to increase immigration, you always need to come back to the people's representatives. But to shut it off in case of emergency or for any other reason, we deem it, look, the president could do that any time, and he does exactly the opposite, and then wants to do lawlessness on guns in the Second Amendment. And what's funny is, doesn't anyone take a look at Europe? Europe has draconian gun laws, and they have even worse Islamic terror gun.
There was actually one of the French government officials that said shortly after the shooting in Paris that they needed to relook at their whole gun control thing, because it's obvious when you have these type of things happen in your midst, this type of just sheer terror, massacres, people start thinking, okay, obviously government didn't stop this. Government's not always there to protect. And the immediate thought is to the natural right to self-defend. And that's one of the reasons why I think all these gun control efforts that the left are trying to put forward with these killings, they don't work, because the average American looks at this and says, I'm going to protect myself against this. So I think it's kind of backfiring. But you don't really think that Europe is going to kind of relook at the whole gun thing in the context of this type of violence, do you?
Sweden has a rape crisis from the Muslim immigrants, and they don't want to look at Muslim immigration. So I don't think they're ever going to change. But
sure.
Look, Americans are different, and especially on the gun issue, that is one issue in general where I feel one of the few issues where we've moved in a positive direction and where we get stronger. And look, the Democrats are swimming upstream here, because people's intuitive reaction to something like this is, holy heck, I better go get myself some more guns and ammo while, before the prices really go up. And they are not, this is not going to go over well. And I actually, there's a little devilish side of me that hopes Obama takes some sort of drastic illegal executive action against guns, because that's the only issue that tends to force our conservative ink to mobilize and actually do something. They don't care about most other issues, immigration being one of them. So, look, maybe it might be a good thing if Obama does this.
Well, I don't know. I do think, and I'm not sure, it'd be interesting to see if there's a correlation between increased gun sales and these violent acts. I do know over Black Friday, I heard a statistic that suggested it was one of the record-breaking days for gun purchases, probably in part driven by what the average American is saying regarding the Islamic immigration into this country. The average American I talk to, and of course I don't necessarily select from the broad middle, but the average person I talk to, they're very concerned about this issue, and so much so that a lot of people are thinking about self-protection. Alaska, of course, not that much of an issue, not because there aren't Islamists here, because there are, but because every other person walking the streets has a gun. So, I mean, could you imagine trying to do a replay like what happened in California or in Paris in a place where you've got high density gun ownership? It just can't happen, at least not to that extent.
Well, the joke is I live in Baltimore, and they have draconian gun laws, and you basically can't carry, and now they harass the heck out of you just to own. And, oh, my gosh, per capita, the gun homicides are unreal. And that's the thing. I mean, the reason why the left has lost on this issue is because the reality hits them in the face. You basically take away the guns from everyone except for the people who will use them nefariously. And when you interject that into international terrorism, so then you basically have a scenario where everyone's disarmed except for the terrorists like they have in Europe. The American people ain't going to buy that here.
Daniel, I appreciate your thoughts on this. Obviously, never enough time to talk about this important issue. We'll have you back. Stay with us, Joe Miller Show. Be right back after these messages.